Hello, everyone. Welcome to another weekly episode of Shadow Space. I am your host, Laura Brown. To all my returning listeners, you guys already know how I feel about you. I can't thank you enough for the support that you continue to show me. Thank you for showing up, and thank you for spreading the word and sharing my content with anyone who may benefit from the topics that we cover here on the podcast. I am so appreciative to you guys. To all my new listeners who are not familiar with who I am your host, Laura Brown. I am a certified trauma-informed breathing and meditation coach. I typically publish weekly episodes related to self-development, introspection, self-discovery, working with the shadow, which is most often referred to our hidden belief of ourselves, some of the unconscious patterns and ideas that we have of ourselves, and so much more. So I created this podcast to help guide those who are seeking a deeper understanding in these areas of themselves, or just maybe simply wanting answers and to know more about themselves and how they can improve in areas where they may feel stuck. I do, however, cover sensitive topics on my podcast. So I do like to share a full disclaimer as well that I am not a licensed therapist. And by all means, the topics and the ideas that I share on my podcast are not meant to treat or diagnose anyone. These are just my personal references and my personal experiences in my life that I discuss. So I always like to say that because it's so important to really take care of our health. And so I advise anyone that I speak to who may be suffering, especially in some area in their life, to really just seek the support that you need. There's so much professional support out there. So I encourage anyone to really just use your best discernment when it comes to your health and your well-being. It is so important, and really very important for me to say that because I take it very seriously. And if you guys want to reach out to me as well for any support or any guidance, I'll be more than happy to share any resources that I can in whichever way that I can to support you guys. Okay? All right. So with all that being said, I wanted to take a deep dive into a topic today that has been somewhat of a recurring theme, it seems like, in my life lately. And I just wanted to kind of talk about it on my podcast because I know this has also come up in dialogue as I was just having conversations with people, and just, it's been popping up everywhere in my life. And so I wanted to give it really some light on my podcast. So the topic I want to dive into today is self-trust. So self-trust is something that has been a theme of my life, most of my life. But before I dive into how that has impacted me, I found a very, just an incredible definition of self-trust online that I want to share with you guys. So self-trust means consistently staying true to yourself. At its very core, trusting yourself means you look after your own needs and safety. You treat yourself with love and compassion rather than strive for perfection, which is very difficult to do. I can say that. And then you know deep down that you can survive difficulties and you refuse to give up on yourself. So I thought that was so beautifully stated, and it rang so true to me because I've had such an interesting experience with trust in my life in general, as I'm sure most of us have. But until you have had an experience with mistrust, you can't understand the full idea of the value of trust. So I'm going to say that again because I think trust is a very valuable tool, and it's a very valuable gift when either you can trust someone or someone trusts you. I think it's something that is earned, but it's also something that is easily lost. And it's something that also can serve as a valuable tool when we learn to instill that in ourselves. And this is why I wanted to touch on self-trust, because I don't know about you guys, but I did not grow up in an environment where self-trust was ever even talked about, right? I think most of us, especially those of us who grew up maybe the old school way, or perhaps taught to give, perhaps even overgive, to be accommodating, and perhaps even be over accommodating. That's sort of how I grew up. I was taught, the way you show up for others is very important, which I agree with. I think it's really important to show up in a positive light for others and to be able to support others and to be there for others. But I think in the same way that we do that, we need to learn to do that for ourselves as well. And that is something that I think most of us lacked growing up, or wasn't instilled in us enough. And so this is where self-trust has been a struggle for me in my life. And it wasn't until in my adulthood, later in my adulthood, that I learned that the value of self-trust. Because without self-trust, we can really self-sabotage. It's very important that we learn to instill trust in ourselves so that we can continue to move forward in our life and not get in our own way. Because without that foundational piece of trusting oneself, we will continually live in this perpetual state of self-doubt. Because without self-trust, it naturally instills some thoughts around self-doubt and, self-sabotaging behavior, ensues with that. And I talk about this on my self-doubt episode that I shot a couple of weeks ago, and the negativity spiral. Because, once you open up that can of worms, it only continues to go down a rabbit hole that is very difficult to reel in. And so self-trust is so important. It's kind of our baseline, right, to becoming our whole self, our true self, and really learning to understand that we can rely on our capabilities and our abilities to do the things that we want and that go after the things that we desire. So it's really, really important to understand what that looks like for you in your life. And so for me, 2 years ago, I was at a point in my life where, it did not align, where externally other people saw great things about me, which was such a gift and a blessing that I'll always be grateful for. But internally, I found myself in a place where that was not the case. Some of my peers in my professional life were seeing me in great light. They saw huge potential in me. They saw me in higher positions than I ever even dreamed or dared to go after myself, because they saw so many qualities in me that I didn't believe in myself and that I didn't trust that I was capable of. And so when I started to examine and explore this area of my life, it led me down the path of trust and understanding what that represented in my life, and understanding how can I build more of that, or was it even possible to build? And so that's where I found myself a couple of years ago, exploring and doing the deep dive and doing the shadow work, and just going within to try to understand where this was misaligned for myself. And what I have come to understand as a result of that exploration is that self-trust is something that can be built. And it can be built by anyone, by all of us. And it's something that grows over time. It's something that we can build at any point. And in my experience, in that exploration that I dove into years ago, I learned that for me, self-trust is not something you're either born with or born without. It's something that we develop. It's a skill that we develop over time and that we build upon. And that skill grows the more we practice building trust in ourselves. And how can we go about that? And for me, that was kind of the transformation that took place. I learned that, hey, it's really important for me to keep the promises that I make to myself as much as I would for another person. That's where the foundational piece came in for me, because without that, I am learning to self sabotage and I am learning to essentially let myself down. So once I kind of understood the connection there of, maybe I should also put an emphasis in keeping the promises, no matter how small or irrelevant they may be to myself, as I would another, I started to see that traction grow in my life to the point where it became a natural thing. And I'll give an example here. Like for me, where that translated, it was my fitness journey and just showing up for myself and taking care of myself, taking care of my well being, building a routine or a ritual, if you will, and following through with that and really keeping those promises and making those a priority for myself, learning to put those needs first and building, that self love that I give out to everyone else, and if you are like me, you probably are there for everyone else, right? And so that was me. It was me always showing up for those around me and doing a great job doing that, because again, that's the way I grew up. I was taught to be there for others and give and overgive and accommodate, over accommodate, to a certain extent, sacrifice, self-sacrifice, And so once I started to flip that and pour into myself, I saw such a huge transformation in my life. And again, this is how it translated for me and my well-being and just my wellness journey. Like, for example, when I talk about the gym a lot, because I love to work out, I love to, take care of my fitness and my mental health and just all aspects of my wellness. But it showed up in a way that other people started to notice, because people would ask me just in conversation, they said, "Oh my God, how do you do this? How do you just show up? You just have natural discipline." And I always responded and said, "You know what? This is something that I continue to practice. This is something that I make a priority, And so sure enough, me working out 4 days a week became non-negotiable for me anymore, because I learned that that was important to me and it was meaningful for me. And it was something that I held highly for myself. And it was something that was very important to me to keep as a promise to myself, which then naturally became a natural feeling and just translated easily or seemingly easily to others, because other people started to ask me, "How do I do this?" And again, this is all part of the practice. When you make a promise to someone, you keep it, or you try your best to keep it, because as human beings, we're naturally wired to do good and to show up for others and to support other people. That's what we do best. And we love the feeling that we get when we do that for others. But most of us are not naturally wired to pour that back into ourselves and to build the skill of building that self-reliance. Because let me tell you, when you learn to build self-trust, what that does is it translates into self-reliance, because now your mind starts to assimilate that, hey, I made a promise to myself that I want to do X, Y, and Z, and I am showing up and I am doing X, Y, and Z. And guess what? That's important to you. So let's continue to do more of that. And the more you repeat these patterns, the more it becomes a natural state and a natural habit that you create, and a very healthy habit, by the way. So again, self-trust is something that we can build at any point. And so I don't want anyone to think that other people have it naturally more than others. Perhaps that is true. Perhaps some people have it because they've been raised that way from a very early age. And if they were, that is fantastic. It's amazing. I think we need to all do a better job teaching our children at a very young age to learn that self-reliance, simply because we live in a world of cause and effect and a world that is so unpredictable. So, no matter how well we intend to be there for those people that we love, including our kids, our family, our friends, sometimes life circumstances get in the way and we just can't do that. And so, if you are a person that never learned to rely on yourself, then that may be very difficult to overcome on your journey, you know? And so it builds more of that letdown mentality, and then that, oh, I can't do this, and other people are not there for me, X, Y, and Z, and so forth and so on. So, self trust also builds self confidence, which is also another very key component to understand when you're doing this exercise of really practicing the steps to get to that trust of the self, is that you show up more confidently for yourself. It's not necessarily an outwardly thing, but what it does is it gives you the opportunity to be more confident in your abilities. So naturally, you start to take more risk. You start to go after more things that you otherwise thought you couldn't. You essentially learn to get out of your own way, which is such a beautiful thing because we are our worst enemy. I said this in so many of my episodes, and it's so true. Just in my experience, I've observed this in myself. I always used to think it was other people or circumstances or someone else to blame until I started to do my shadow work. That's when I realized, like, wait a minute, I need to take a step back and take a fair assessment of this. And what I've discovered is that I was the one getting in my own way. And some of these behaviors were very unconscious. This is why I talk so much about the shadow, because when we're wired a certain way, unless we have the awareness or the willingness, for that matter, to work on these areas of our life, we will continue to operate that way forever. We may never know that it's a block. We may never realize it. Or even if we do realize it, we may think that we're actually stuck forever. And this is why I want to talk about that, because I think when people say, well, I don't trust myself, I don't have confidence, other people have it more than I do. I want to say it is all a skill. We learn to practice self-trust as much as we learn to practice self-reliance, as much as we learn to practice discipline, as much as we learn to practice consistency. And in turn, it builds self-confidence, because then all of a sudden, what was negotiable with us or what we were questioning or questionable for us becomes a natural state. It becomes a natural feeling. We are just doing it, and we don't even realize we're doing it because we have built the practices and the skills and the consistency to get to that place where now it's become a natural state or a natural default, if you will, and how we just operate in life. And as I said in my example with the gym, I actually didn't know it was kind of showing up this way for me in my life until people started to make remarks about it and ask me questions about, hey, how do you do this? How are you showing up when it's only 8 degrees outside and I want to crawl up in bed? And that's when it dawned on me, and I said, oh, wow, okay. It's become such a natural way of being for me that I don't question it any longer. But it was never like this for me before. The only way it got to this place is because I learned to prioritize my needs, and I learned to practice the skills to keep the promises I make to myself and to uphold that and to understand the value and the importance of what that means and how that translates for me in my life. And so that's the point I want to make here. I think we all seemingly think that if we don't have this and someone else has those qualities, but we don't have these qualities, that we are never going to get them. But I'm here to say that self-trust is something that can be built. I have built it in myself in certain areas of my life, which I am very proud of, which I know can be done. And other areas, it is still a work in progress. And it is also something that we build over time. But now that I understand it better and I can build it for myself in so many areas of my life, I can continue to practice this and apply this in so many areas, right? And so that's what I want to share. That's the point of this podcast today, because I want everyone to understand that we are all empowered with the tools to do this, and that we can overcome, all of the blockages that we think we can't. This is why the shadow work is important, because it's important to understand how this shows up in your life, where it might be rooted at, where it might be connected to, and how can you overcome it? And are there steps to overcome it? And that's one of the other things I did actually in my research earlier this week. I was looking at some of the suggestions, and it was so interesting because they covered all the things I talk about here, where one of the suggestions on how to learn to build trust in yourself again is learning to embrace the whole you. And I thought that was interesting because I talk about the shadow on my podcast, but I think I referred to the shadow as the aspects of ourselves that we hide, that we repress, that we're not so proud of. These are just maybe even some of our unconscious ideas, right, that we repress. But then the other aspect of that is the light, is what we show outwardly. It's what we're proud of. It's our personality. It's what we want other people to see. It's what we deem that is acceptable to society. It's what we want more of. And that is the light aspect of ourselves. The shadow is what we hide. That's the behind the scenes, under the surface. And both of those things are what makes us whole and complete. And so as we are building trust in ourselves, we have to embrace the whole us, the whole you, the whole me, right? And we have to learn. I want to say learn, because it's a learned skill to embrace both sides. Most people just don't even understand what the shadow means and what the shadow is, let alone accept it or embrace it. So learning to embrace the whole you is very important in learning to build trust, because the lighter aspects of you and the shadow, or the seemingly darkness, is what makes you whole and complete. And both things are important, right? To your authenticity, to your authentic self. We can't be one or the other. Both exist, and both are valuable, and both are insightful, both are needed in order for us to live our true authentic expression in this life. And so one of the suggestions was embrace the whole you. The other suggestion that I thought was really cool is to hold on to your values. And the values are also important, because I think as we continue to evolve and grow, naturally our values will continue to evolve and grow, and perhaps even change. Because if we hold values that were based on our conditioning or preconceived notions from others, those may change as we continue to know more about ourselves, as we continue to dive deeper into ourselves, as we continue to know who we are, as we continue to dive into our beliefs. So our values may change, but understanding our values is very critical to learning to trust ourselves, and perhaps changing our values, or maybe seeing how they transform as we evolve. And the third suggestion that I found that was also connected to what I just spoke about earlier is keep the promises that you make to yourself and to others. And that was a big part of my transformation, learning to keep those promises, no matter how small they are. And I'm not suggesting that we can keep all of the promises that we make to ourselves, because life, again, will present circumstances sometimes to where we just can't do that. Things will get in the way. things will happen to where we may not be able to show up as we want to for ourselves or others. And so I'm not suggesting that we do this religiously. I'm just saying, to intend and understand the value and the importance of keeping your promise to yourself, and to really just do your best to show up for yourself as you would for others, because this is what instills that your mind to register, the actions that you're taking, and then translate that into the behavior, the healthy behavior that you're forming as you evolve and as you go on. So it's really important to keep those promises to yourself and really show up for yourself as you would for everyone else around you, for your friends, for your family, for everyone, right? And then the other suggestion that came up too was to be accountable for your mistakes. I think this is really important. We can all learn a thing or two about our mistakes, and learning to be accountable can be very difficult. But, learning that we can be accountable and move forward once we make a mistake is also very critical. Some other suggestions were, self-compassion, self-forgiveness, which I'll dive into more in other topics, because I want to really dedicate the time to talk about, especially self-compassion and self-forgiveness. I think those two are very, very, very important. So I will dedicate some time and talk about those two skills as well. But I think, again, what I wanted to reiterate on this episode is that if you ever find yourself in a place where you lack the trust to move forward, or to go after something, or your desires, your wildest dreams, please know that you can build that, and you can start somewhere. You can start small. You can start by looking at the promises that you make to yourself, or, how are you letting yourself down? That's so important to examine. I had to dive into that space. Like, how am I self-sabotaging? How am I letting myself down? And what am I doing? What are my actions? How does that show up for me? And why do I do these things? Right? These are all important questions we need to ask ourselves, and really spend the time to learn what we do, how we do it, so that we can understand how we can build from there, and what do we need to do in order to change, these aspects of ourselves. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys, because I think for me, self-trust is the baseline. It is the foundation of the self. This is such an important tool to help us move forward in life and navigate and go through with our dreams, our visions, our goals, right? And explore and give ourselves a chance, right? To take a leap of faith, or to try something new, or to know that we're capable and that we have all the tools that are required within ourselves to do the things that we want to do. Learning that we don't necessarily need someone else to believe in us as much as we need to believe in ourselves. So that is what I wanted to share, because I think this can be such a roadblock to so many people. I know for me, it's been a roadblock that I am continually overcoming as I evolve on my journey, as I learn, as I grow. It is constantly something that I'm aware of, that I continue to practice, I put into practice. And the other thing I want to touch on about our goals, our dreams, and our vision is that sometimes our goals and visions and dreams can seem so unfathomable to people around us. And in order for us to know that we can do those things, we have to believe in ourselves. Okay, guys? All right, guys. So that is the episode for today. I hope this was insightful to you guys in some way, enlightening to you all. And I just, as always, I want you to continue to spread your light, and remember that the light exists within you. As always, I will leave you here and just hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. And I wish you all nothing but the best. And with that, I will wish you all an amazing weekend. Love and light, peace and blessings. And I will see you guys on my next episode. All right, guys. Bye.